PLAYODE today.
Sunday mornings are reserved for a good word on WBO.
Have you heard the secret of what New Orleans is talking about? I promise everything will be okay if you're listening here on the airwaves. It's that WBOK 12:30 a.m.
From the campus of Xavier University, WBOK 1230 AM. Go. An Equity Media Station.
I'm Amber Payton with 4 Things You Should Know with BIN News. Responders are recovering 67 victims from last night's midair crash over the Potomac. A temporary morgue is set up at the South Capitol Street heliport where boats bring bodies to ambulances for identification in nearby tents. Black Thornton, Illinois Township Supervisor Tiffany Henyard claims she was threatened while breaking up a brawl at Tuesday's board meeting. Jedediah Brown disputes this, saying she hit him with a microphone. Police have made no arrests. D.C. area first responders are searching the Potomac River for survivors of last night's plane crash near Reagan Airport. Black Mayor Muriel Bowser thanked officials for their support. And tonight's iHeartRadio Fire Aid Benefit Concert in Inglewood supports Los Angeles wildfire recovery. The tickets are $99, and every dollar raised will go toward short-term relief efforts and longer-term initiatives for fire prevention. Check out fireaidla.org for more info. I'm Amber Payton on the Black Information Network, your home for Black News First.
It's now time for Let's Elevate, the Arnie and Kerry Show with Arnie Filko and Kerry Grant.
All right, good evening, New Orleans.
Good evening.
On this beautiful Thursday night here in the greatest city in the country. I think our guest may dispute that when we bring him on in a minute here, but I'm Arnie Filko.
And I'm Kerry Grant, the real Kerry Grant.
The real Kerry Grant, and we got a full show tonight at around 6:30. We're going to welcome Jacob Heilbrunn, a really renowned author, writes extensively in our nation's capital, has written several books, and the last one he wrote, which is called America Last, is just an absolutely fascinating book. I couldn't put it down. It tells the story of kind of the conservative right movement in our country going all the way back 100 years. So looking forward to meeting Jacob, having Jacob as our guest. I had a chance to meet him a week ago in our nation's capital. He's a really wonderful guy, and I think it'll be a really interesting interview. And Kerry, we'll talk a little bit in a few minutes about just the absolutely horrific, tragic accident that occurred at Reagan Airport last night. But before we get too serious, we thought we'd bring somebody on that I've known for a number of years. As everybody knows in our listening audience, we are only 10 days away from the big game here in New Orleans. Super Bowl, Kansas City Chiefs and the Philadelphia Eagles. We're starting to see a few fans kind of come into the city, but really Sunday, Monday, we're going to start to see a lot of fans wearing green, wearing that red and what is it? Red and kind of
gold. I have no idea.
All right, but we know the other team, the green and white. And,
yes, we do.
And I asked a good friend of mine to come on, who's from the city of brotherly love. City of brotherly love. I don't know. That just doesn't work. But Dan Kurtz, Dan, you with us?
I sure am, Arnie. It's great to talk to you. I appreciate the invitation.
It's good to have you meet my co-host, Kerry Grant.
Hi, Dan. How you doing?
Hi, Kerry. I'm doing great.
Kerry had a long career in acting and decided that he wanted to follow that by being on radio with me.
Absolutely.
So I'm honored.
But he wanted to be next to a real superstar.
There you go.
Oh, thank you. God, thank you.
There you go. You figured it out.
So Dan Kurtz, from where?
From Philadelphia, as you so aptly said, the city of brotherly love. Just one of the things we're known as. But yes, I'm a Philly boy, born and raised.
So I wanted you to come on and give us just we have a listening audience here in New Orleans. They love sports and many other topics, but we're about to be invaded, I think, by those folks from the Northeast. Tell us a little bit about the Eagles and Eagles fans as well.
So I think actually this is an Eagles team that the New Orleans fan base can really get behind. It reminds me a lot of the really strong, the really good New Orleans teams of like the late 80s and early 90s with the Ricky Jacksons and the Sam Mills.
Yeah.
It's a defense first, run the ball, and we're more physical than you, and that's the way we play the game. And at the end of the day, we're going to win because we're just going to be, true, like solid football players and play just a solid physical game. I think it's it's a team I think New Orleans can really get behind if we put aside that little bit of, NFC rivalry.
No, I think New Orleans fans probably are cheering for the, if nothing else, because we're pretty sick of the Chiefs. I have to say,
yes, we are.
We'd like to see a new Super Bowl winner. Of course, you took one of our players here in Zach Bond, and we
turned him into a superstar.
Turned him into a real superstar, and you have a quarterback also from New Orleans that's pretty darn good. So there's a little bit of a New Orleans gumbo flavor to the Eagles.
Yeah,
squad.
and I guess I can say that former Saints have been the stalwarts on our one and only Super Bowl team.
Yeah.
So it's good. I think portends well for us. It's a good omen for the Eagles to have a couple of former Saints starring for us.
You made a great point about the kind of the grit, and we love grit down here, and your team has a lot of grit. And I think that you're right. I mean, maybe if you can tell the fan base to come down here and kind of get with the Who Dat Nation, who knows what we can put together.
I think so. New Orleans is a city I really like. I've been many times.
Okay.
And I think, a little bit this is a redemption bowl for Eagles fans. Number one, because just 2 years ago we lost to Kansas City. But as a longtime Eagles fan, I remember back to 1981, our last New Orleans Super Bowl appearance, that unfortunately did not end so well for the Eagles. And I remember it was the first time it actually occurred to me that my team could lose a championship because I was coming off a Phillies World Series and the Flyers about to be in the Stanley Cup and the Sixers in the NBA championship. We were the city of champions, and all of a sudden I didn't know what happened. So looking for a little redemption this time, for sure.
So what's the sentiment in Philly these days? I mean, how excited are people? Are a lot of people coming to New Orleans? What's the feel there in City of Brotherly Love?
I think, there's a real buzz for sure. People are super, super excited. You see nothing but green. More of the old Kelly green than the newer midnight green, but tons of green everywhere. The new greeting in Philadelphia, it's both a greeting and a way to say hello and goodbye or just to express yourself, is Go Birds. Everything is, you walk in, you order a cup of coffee, it's Go Birds. On your way out the door, Go Birds. So, people are so fired up. And I think you're going to see a lot more Eagles fans in New Orleans than you will Kansas City fans.
I can see that.
The interesting thing is this is kind of new for the Eagles. We made we won an NFL championship in 1960 against Arnie's Packers. And then 20 more years till we got back to a Super Bowl. 20 more years till we got back to a Super Bowl.
Wow.
Now all of a sudden it's 3 in 7 years, 2 in 3 years, and we're not quite sure how to adjust our mental framework of being kind of a perennial Super Bowl type of team. So right now we still carry that underdog mentality, and I think we're going to show up that way. But I don't think you have to worry. I think, it'll be safe on the streets. And I think what you're going to find is that Eagles fans are really going to want to engage with all of what New Orleans has to offer. They're going to be really excited about like the culture and the cuisine. But unlike most tourists, what I'm predicting is they're not going to want to go to the big name places you hear about that the tourists go to. They're going to find all the little corner places and, local places. And that's where you're going to find most of the Eagles fans. Just like we have our, everybody from outside wants to come to Pat's and Gino's for their cheesesteaks, but nobody from Philly eats there. I think we're going to find the places where only the New Orleans, the local people eat, and that's
Yes,
why you're going to
there's
see a lot
plenty
more
of that.
gravy.
Yeah, there are definitely plenty. So I was going to ask you, Mr. Kurtz. So, is it Philly cheesesteak or is it kind of shrimp and oyster po' boys? What is the Kurtz clan like?
Well,
There's no comparison.
you know, I mean, my last meal will be a cheesesteak and a soft pretzel, but in between this meal now and that one, I'm going to eat as much New Orleans food as I can get. Yeah.
There you go. Well, we there was an article on the front page yesterday of our newspaper that got a lot of New Orleanians worried because it said that Eagles fans, when they win, they like to kind of climb up poles. And, you know, we're a city of 300 years, so our infrastructure crumbles pretty quickly. So is there, you know, we want you to win, but is there a way to
stay
maybe,
off the poles,
yeah,
please.
maybe temper the climbing on our poles and our buildings? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, no doubt that you know, the city has taken to greasing the poles.
Yes.
And it doesn't seem to be effective. You know, there's always somebody on the top. Sadly, there was a really tragic incident from this past NFC Championship game. We were really sad to see that, and perhaps that will keep people off the poles, and they'll find other ways to celebrate. But I am proud to say that other than perhaps climbing the poles, there isn't a lot of property damage, or, you know, there's no cars on fire, and there's no, there's just revelry, and the streets fill, and it's, you know, so civil. And the thing about sports is nothing galvanizes a community like shared success, and sports is at the forefront of that. And much like, you know, New Orleans was really part of the revitalization was after Katrina was the Saints and a Super Bowl and something to be proud of and look to, and as a beacon of hope. You know, sports does that, and so here in Philadelphia, it's a great time to be here in Philadelphia.
Well, one thing I wanted to say is that I'm a Saints season ticket holder, and I sit, unfortunately, behind the visitors bench, so I have a lot of visitors that sit by us. And your fans were here recently, and, you know, they get a bad reputation, but they seem to have a really good time, and they were very, very fun, you know, and into it, but they were very fun and playful about, you know, their fandom. And I thought that was really good. And I think people need to understand these people are fun loving, and we're a fun loving city. So we're welcoming you guys with open arms.
I appreciate it. I'm sadly, I won't be able to be there myself, but I do look forward to watching the game with my family and sharing a championship. You know, like in a way, as a family, I was fortunate to be at the Eagles' one and only Super Bowl win in Minneapolis. This time, I want to do it with my wife and my kids and my brothers and the extended family, and, you know, with the picture of my father out and watching.
There you go.
That'll be good. Well, listen, thank you for joining us. We wish all of the Philadelphia fans a great Super Bowl, a great stay in New Orleans. And Dan, in tribute to you, we thought we'd close it out with the following.
There you go.
Great song.
I'll save your audience my singing, but I appreciate Fly Eagle Fly.
And look, I want you to make plans for next January, because we'll see you at Lambeau Field, okay? In about 5
I'm
degrees
happy
below.
to see you. I'd love to share a game with you, Liney.
Hey, be well, my friend. Thanks for joining us. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks
Thank
for
you.
having me.
Thank
All
you
right.
for
Birds.
being here.
That's Dan Kurtz from the city of brotherly love in Philly, giving us a little preview of what to expect from those big guys in green and white here.
Stay off the poles, please.
Jazz, do we have a call on the line? Okay. Can you hook it up for us?
Yep, you got Mark online.
Mark. All right. Hey, Mark, how are you? Hey, Mark, you're with Carrie and Arnie. How are you doing? What can we do for you?
He must have hung up.
No, we don't have Mark. Okay.
He's a
Well, Mark,
US
if
fan.
you're listening, call back in. We'd love to hear from you. All right, so maybe transitioning just for a bit, Carrie.
Yeah.
You know, really was turning the TV on about 8 o'clock last night and seeing the breaking news about this crash between a military helicopter and an American Airlines regional flight.
Yes.
God, it's just,
it's terrible.
It's just
terrible.
terrible. Honestly, I couldn't help but to cry. I mean, just to think, that these poor folks who got in an airplane, coming to the nation's capital, literally within seconds of landing, and it all ended.
And just having been there last week at the same airport and everything. I mean, this is a very busy airport, but you're right. Air travel in America is very, very safe. Let me say that first. We travel a lot, and you travel a lot, and we know that. But this was a very rare occurrence, but a tragic occurrence because of so many people and some very young people who were involved. And I just want to say one thing because it kind of had unfortunately, a flavor that came into our own home that my two bonus daughters were figure skaters in the Northeast for years. And the guy, Vladim, who was killed in the crash, actually was one of their coaches along the way. So it's very unfortunate, and we're all devastated by that because they knew him and they knew him well.
And a lot of the people on the plane were coming from Wichita because they had just finished
the competition, and after the competition,
or national competition.
Yeah, and after the competition, they had tryouts and things for younger people who are the up and coming stars. So some of those people were people that they coached. So it's most unfortunate.
Yeah, really just. You're right about the safety, I think, of our aviations. This is the first accident in really 15 years.
Yeah.
And mid-air collisions especially are very
rare.
Yeah. The investigation is going to be very important here. There's a lot of questions.
Yes.
Was the helicopter in the right place? Did it see the plane? Why did it not? It was not able to avoid it. Same thing on the American Airlines plane. The problem with planes is when they're landing, I mean, candidly, there's not much maneuverability.
Right.
I mean,
it's like 400 or 500 feet above the ground. There's not a lot you can do.
Right. And but the investigation will be important. I mean, the one thing I think that I felt right away, and I'm not an aviation expert, is I didn't realize there was so much military activities at a major airport like that.
Yeah. And it's because there's so many military bases and the like around Washington, D.C. People don't realize there's Andrews Air Force Base, there's stuff in Virginia. So, I'm with you. I didn't realize how many of them were passing through that way because there's a lot of land around there.
I mean, do you think, one of the changes I've heard today that, it's an easy one to grasp onto is that they might bar military, aviation from a public airport.
They
like
probably
that,
will. Yeah,
and have the helicopters and the planes, military planes, really only take off and land at military bases.
Unless they're ferrying someone to Washington, and this aircraft was capable of that, but that wasn't happening last night. It was just a training mission, and you could train somewhere else. Definitely not in that corridor.
Yeah.
That seemed like that caused most of the problem, being in the corridor.
Right. I'm sure, it kind of it transitioned. It went from a recovery, activity for many hours. Unfortunately, the problem is that where the accident happened, is a big body of water.
Right.
And they said that water was 35 degrees. And
Right.
can't even, they can't last an hour.
Yeah, you get hypothermia pretty quickly in water. And just like what happened in Titanic, as people know about the Titanic situation, more people froze to death than drowned. So, that's what happens in that kind of water. The other thing, and I know we both will talk about this at other times too, but this was a very bad example with Trump of not being a consoler in chief, not being, he didn't even need to be on TV, really. That's just a thing that he has to do. But the way that he handled himself was probably the worst thing we've ever seen after a national disaster. It was unnecessary, and he went down a path that just created a lot of havoc and talked about things he knew, which he doesn't know because nobody knows because the investigation has just started. but that was a terrible performance and really a bad sign for the future.
Yeah, I mean, I stayed up late because the press conference
Yeah.
started about midnight, and
Yeah.
I just couldn't go to sleep. And they had the two U.S. senators, both Republicans from
Yeah.
Kansas.
Yeah.
They had the mayor of the district.
Yes.
They had other law enforcement people there. That's how you do a press conference.
Right.
It was very well organized. There weren't 100 people trying to speak.
Yeah.
And you had a Democratic mayor and two Republican U.S. senators. I mean, to be honest, their message was the investigation will be what it is, okay?
Right.
Now, the time is to console, to heal, to give our thoughts and prayers to the families and the
Right.
people
And do
on the
all we
plane.
can for them.
Exactly. It was the perfect message. And then you contrast that with what you had today with our own president coming out and, talking about DEI and woke and, first of all, I don't think any of that had anything to do
with this.
whatsoever with anything. But my God, have some decency. And again, I don't want this show every night to be, to be jabbing at our president. I don't think either one of us wants that. But when you do that, the rest of the country, after a terrible national tragedy, is looking for our top leader to offer some warmth and some comfort to our country, to the victim. I mean, contrast this with, maybe he's changed a lot now over the last few years, but contrast that honestly with a George Bush, okay?
Yeah.
Or even a Mayor Giuliani,
Yeah.
okay, after 9/11.
Right.
I mean, it's not the time to come out and play politics or policy. And it was sickening. I
really
have to
was.
say. And I hope that, reasonable-minded people on all sides of the aisle, constituents that may have voted for the president, he needs to be condemned for this. I mean, this is.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of stupid things that he's done over the last 9 days, but this is maybe
This
the
is really bad.
cruelest thing he's
That's
done.
what I meant.
Yeah.
And that's why I brought it up, because, like you said, policy-wise, we'll talk about whatever we talk about, but this was just cruel because there were people who were literally at the airport waiting for their
Yes.
loved ones to show up,
Yeah.
and they had to go through this. So just to have some compassion for people's situation was just not there. It
Right.
wasn't there at all.
And I'll say this, Kerry. I think, I'm not going to, I don't want to get too deep into this, but I have to tell you, when you see events like last night,
Mhm.
it makes it even more important than ever to understand how precious life is and how
Yes.
fragile life is. And if nothing else tonight, go back and, hug your wife and your
Yes.
children. And because you never know if you're going to wake up tomorrow. And these poor folks that left from Wichita,
Right.
I mean, they didn't know that 4 hours later life would be over. And
Right.
same thing for the 3 people in the helicopter as
Yeah,
well.
yeah.
And it just, it brings home what's important. I have to admit, I was watching a basketball game last night, and the team that I
Yeah.
wanted lost, and I was just angry. And at 8:00 or so, I turned the channel,
Yeah.
because I didn't want to watch sports anymore. And I saw this, and within minutes, it made me. I felt like an idiot. I mean,
Yeah.
who cares what happened in a
Right,
basketball
right.
game or a football game
Right.
when you see a life situation like
Yeah,
that?
people need to understand, like you said, everything is precious, and we need to embrace our children, our families, whoever we care about. It could be anybody, someone you work with, but always know that anything can happen at any time, and you just have to be prepared for that being that last moment, and never let that last moment be a moment of anger or a moment of whatever. Just always embrace the good.
Yes, absolutely. We touched on this last night. We don't have much time to spend on it, but these Senate confirmation hearings are
Yeah.
ongoing. We had 2 of them today. Tulsi Gabbard for intelligence chief, and we had Robert Kennedy
Yeah.
again on the stand for a second day. This was actually today's committee was Senator Cassidy's
Yes.
committee that he chairs for health. I don't think my opinions changed from last night.
No, he was pretty stern.
Yeah. And I thought, look, it's hard to believe we can't do better than this. I mean,
Yeah.
Kennedy really, some of his views, first of all, they're very inconsistent. I mean, he's wavering and changing now in order to get confirmed.
Yes.
And Tulsi Gabbard, as I said, absolutely has no business in this position. I mean, I think the Democrats that challenged her really said it right. It's not about her or her military service or her congressional. It's about her judgment.
Yeah.
And that as a person in leadership, to take a trip and meet with the president of Syria, who really was a murderer, and meet with terrorist organizations, or support Edward Snowden. There's a lot of things there, and I think Kennedy's going to be approved. I'd be pretty shocked at this point if he's not.
Yeah.
Gabbard, I would say it's probably 70-30 that she'll get confirmed as well, just because the Republicans hold the majority. But I have to say, very frankly, very honestly, and I think anybody with any objectivity would agree with this, neither one of them should be
they're not qualified
in the
at all.
cabinet.
No.
But
they're probably, this is terrible because these are some of the least qualified people for their job. And with Kennedy, I know you don't have to be a doctor to be the head of this organization, but you should have some sense of medical science and that type of thing being where we're going with this. I mean, everything with him is conspiracy theories and just crazy takes on things, which are not even real. And that's very bothersome. And with Miss Gabbard, it's really bothersome that she's pretty much a foreign agent in my mind, that she's not, to be in charge of intelligence for this country when you literally are on the wrong side of intelligence is really very strange.
Yeah, it's
and very dangerous.
It's a little frightening. Yeah, I was going to say, for our country, it's fairly frightening. All right, well, listen, you and I aren't going to change that, though, unless we get elected to be senators really quickly. I don't think that's how. Why don't we take, Jazz, a quick break? On the other side, we hope to have Jacob here as our guest. He'll be calling in from Washington, D.C., and really looking forward to the interview. Love to hear from you, by the way, 504-582-9422. We're going to really, touch upon what's happening in D.C. today, but kind of we're going to look back a little bit at some of the history, because I think we can see that history has a tendency to repeat itself. We'll be back in just a couple minutes.
Hi, I'm Leo Jackson, host of Sunday Gospel here every Sunday morning, 5 a.m. to 7 p.m. and 12 o'clock till 2 p.m. You don't want to miss this move of God. It happens only on WBOK. You listen to all day long.
Are you passionate about community safety and police accountability? Tune in to The Monitor's Mic, where we talk about oversight, policing, and you. Hosted by the Office of Independent Police Monitor, we're here to shine a light on policing issues that matter, from real-time policing updates to in-depth interviews. Get the facts and stay informed. We're breaking down complex issues, highlighting community voices, and holding people behind the badge accountable. Join us for an informative hour every Friday at noon on WBOK. Your city, your police, your show. The Monitor's Mic.
Visit DePaul's new Algiers Health Center at 2801 General de Gaulle Drive to receive primary and preventive care for both adults and children. Services also include behavioral health, imaging, and on-site pharmacy, vision, Medicaid enrollment assistance, and more. For appointments, visit DePaulCommunityHealthCenters.org or call 504-207-3060.
WBOK 1230 AM online at WBOK1230.com.
The Arnie and Carrie Show with Arnie Philco and Carrie Grant.
All right, Carrie and I are back with you for the second half of our hour. Jazz, do we have Jacob on the line? We do. Great. Well, as we've been previewing it earlier tonight, we have really somebody I'm really excited to be joining us, Mr. Jacob Heilbrunn. I hope I'm pronouncing that right, Jacob. How are you?
Perfect.
Perfect. Okay,
doing great.
Well, Jacob and I, Carrie, we were we were in D.C. together. Jacob lives there, but
Yeah.
I was in D.C. a couple weeks ago, and we had this really interesting dinner with a pro-Ukrainian group, and went to a really interesting restaurant. Jacob, I won't talk about your driving skills. That'll be another show. But
have you recovered yet?
Well, I've taken a week off, and I'm feeling a little bit better now. But Jacob and I sat next to each other and got to know each other a little bit. And honestly, a really acclaimed author and somebody really well respected in DC circles and really nationally. Yeah. So, Jacob, why don't we start a little bit, just a little bit of background on yourself, if you'll give it.
Sure. So I have been a journalist really since I was in my early 20s, and started working at the New Republic, the Los Angeles Times, and I run a magazine called The National Interest, which focuses on foreign affairs, but I also write a lot for Politico, and I have some comments in the New York Times today. So I write a lot about American politics, both domestic and foreign. And I have a new book out called America Last, the right century-long romance with foreign dictators that looks at the past 100 years of how there have been, just as there was on the left, American progressives tended to romanticize communism and people like Stalin down to Fidel Castro and so forth, that there was a similar phenomenon on the right where conservatives looked to Francisco Franco or even Adolf Hitler as a model for the United States.
Yeah,
and I bring it down today to a certain president's admiration for authoritarians such as Mr. Putin in Russia.
Yeah.
So I draw a whole lineage that goes from the past down to the present.
Yeah, for anybody listening that has an interest in history or politics, foreign affairs, America Last is an incredible book. Jacob, I want to let you know, I picked it up literally on the weekend I left D.C., and took me about 36 hours, and I had finished the book. It is an absolutely fascinating study of history.
Yeah.
And let's before we get to the current time, let's go back in history a little bit, because really your book starts at the turn of the century, and begin before World War I, and then brings it forward to some of the different leaders and conflicts. But just kind of talk a little bit about some of that, maybe older history of what we saw in the conservative movement.
Sure. So I talk about World War I and how there were many German Americans, of course, who had emigrated to the United States at that time. And there were also conservative figures such as H.L. Mencken, who was a world-famous satirist and influential columnist at the time, and extremely conservative. He's a libertarian, and he was opposed to any kind of welfare, and really opposed to Woodrow Wilson because of what he saw as the first attempt to foist big government on Americans. And he was a vehement defender of Kaiser Wilhelm in World War I and mocked Great Britain. And really, he identified with autocracy over democracy. And I sort of use him as, and another figure named George Sylvester Viereck, who was influential at the time. Both of them are, prominent journalists and intellectuals, and try to examine how they sort of set the pattern for worship of foreign dictators. And in the case of Mencken and Viereck became a well-known defender of Nazism, and in fact was even imprisoned during World War II as a foreign agent. And Mencken refused to talk about the Holocaust, and I point to the many conservatives, too, in the 1930s who admired Mussolini or Francisco Franco, also as possible models for the United States. All of this was centered around dissatisfaction and disgruntlement with the United States, and specifically Franklin Delano Roosevelt and the New Deal.
Yeah.
Because they saw Roosevelt as a second version of Woodrow Wilson, and that again, that the real totalitarian threat was not Nazism, it was the Jewish advisors to Franklin Delano Roosevelt who were constructing a big government in the United States. And the result on the eve of World War II, of course, we had a very powerful isolationist movement that essentially said that, you know, what was going on in Europe wasn't America's problem, and that maybe even the Nazis were justified. I point to Herbert Hoover, for example, who met with Hitler and said that it would be a good thing if the Nazis established control over Central Europe. So I won't go any further right now because I don't want to deluge your listeners.
No. Let me just bring you back before we get to kind of the 30s and 40s. Let me bring you back a little bit back further, because I think it seemed in your book that one of the premises was that those that were supporting Germany, first of all, they it was almost like a romantic affair with Germany, culturally and historically. And I think in your writings, there was a feeling that after the defeat of Germany in the First World War, that we almost defeated them too much. Yeah. That we knocked them down so much that it kind of laid the foundation for the 20s and the 30s, leading to Hitler and the Nazi movement. Was that a fair assessment?
Yeah, there's something there, definitely. I mean, there was a widespread disenchantment in the United States with World War I, because Woodrow Wilson had said, you know, the war to end all wars. Well, his own, you know, followers became disaffected because of the Treaty of Versailles in 1919. Was a punitive treaty, peace treaty, that the Germans were forced to sign. And it laid there's the origin of World War II because of this punitive peace. But, you know, and there is a lot to admire in German culture. I mean, they weren't just inventing all of this, you know. It does have great music, great literature. But they took it a step further to actual identification with the far right, whether it was in Italy, Spain, or Nazi Germany. They just went completely toppled into autocracy, worship of autocracy, and the belief that American democracy is not a good thing. Partly based in the belief that the massive immigration that took place in the 1890s and around the turn of the century into the United States was a bad thing. So after World War I, you have a lot of conservatives. I point to this guy named Lothrop Stoddard, who writes a book that is essentially origin. It's called The Rising Tide of Color. He's arguing that immigration is going to swamp the superior white race in the United States. It's the origin of what we today call the Great Replacement. So a lot of what you could say about my book is I'm trying to show that nothing that we hear today is new or original or has been invented by Donald Trump. He's just regurgitating everything that we've already heard in the past.
Yes.
And also, I think that what you're saying is that these undercurrents are always there. They rise to the top from whatever, but most of the time it seems like they are driven by economic crisis that helps people to embrace these things. So is that what your view is with the historical?
Many times. What's interesting about the United States is that it is not an economic crisis right now.
Yeah.
But through the use of social media and to some extent the demise of heavy industry in the Midwest. There has been, you know, economic turmoil, but unemployment is at record lows right now.
Right.
There is I'm not saying that's justifiable, but the reasons to scapegoat people are less than ever. But somehow these themes have been revitalized. And it is an important reminder that racism and anti-Semitism are more virulent than we often think.
Yeah.
And it just takes someone to activate it again.
Yes. Well, we talk about that, Jacob, in the show quite a bit.
Yes.
And in fact, we just had a whole show on it last night. And throughout your book, I mean, you pepper it with, when you talk about certain characters, you pepper with the fact that this person was an anti-Semite.
Right.
And again, I think we need to learn from some of this history. I think that's why a book like yours is so important. We're not going to cover the whole book. I mean, for people interested in the isolationist movement in World War II, or the McCarthy era, in the 50s and moving forward, I mean, this is a great book. One thing that I read that I just thought was fascinating because I absolutely did not know it, and New Orleans is a very Catholic city, but the Catholic Church, especially during the Spanish World War, of who they got behind. And of course, I think, we know where the Pope was at times during World War II relative to Nazi Germany and Italy. But it was very interesting to see Catholicism and why Catholics may have moved in that direction as it relates to being accepted in America. Can you expound on that a little bit?
Yeah, I think the root of the Catholic move was, first of all, as you note, Catholics had a rough ride in the United States. And this was a way for McCarthy and others of demonstrating loyalty and patriotism to America, that they were not, in fact, agents of the Pope, but that they were genuine Americans.
Wow.
The other factor that plays into this is the fear of Bolshevism or communism, which is that the Catholic Church was on the warpath in Europe against Bolshevism, and that's why the Pope saw, Stalin as a greater threat than Hitler, and why the Catholic Church, of course, Francisco Franco became a cause célèbre for many Catholics in America, including if you look at Patrick Buchanan, who I talk about in the book.
Yes.
He grew up worshiping Franco and this authoritarian model. Throughout it is the idea that American democracy is messy, and it gives rights to people who shouldn't be exercising them, and that you need a dominant caste running the show, which conveniently happens to be the people who are writing these things and think that they should be in charge. I mean, that's
right.
They don't think anyone else should be in charge except themselves.
Jacob, I want last question, and then we're going to get into the current time here. But I one of the scariest TV shows that I think I've ever watched was a few years ago when The Plot Against America was shown. Kerry, you saw that?
Yes, I did.
I mean, every week it became more frightening. If you believed in democracy and such. How real was that TV series as it relates to folks like Lindbergh and Ford and Father Coughlin and some of these folks who were true isolationist, anti-Semites, and candidly pro-Nazi?
Yeah.
Yes, that's exactly what I'm talking about in the book. Philip Roth, of course, was the author of The Plot Against America. I don't even think he realized how probable that could have been. I mean, we dodged the bullet with the re-election of Franklin Roosevelt. But the election of Trump shows you that we don't always dodge the bullet. We are now living the alternate reality that usually never happens has happened. We've never had a demagogue, a full-time demagogue as president, which is what we saw today again with Trump.
Yeah.
When someone asked him if he was going to visit the Potomac to see the site of the crash, he said, "What site?" He says, it's water. You expect me to go swimming?
Yeah.
And he's blaming DEI. He's making up stuff. He's blaming DEI for this crash. It's always what serves his own political purposes. We've never had a president who subordinated the welfare of the country to his own personal whims and what he thinks will benefit him.
So, Jacob, let me ask you. All right, so let's talk about the current time right now. So,
yeah,
I think we all know that Trump is transactional. Okay,
Yeah.
He likes wins. He likes to be perceived as a winner. How much do you think he actually believes in autocracy and some of these other philosophies and policies? Do you think it's genuine, or do you just think he uses them almost for his own political purpose?
Well, this is a question, some people are like, raise these same questions about Hitler. But in a sense, I mean, is Trump trying to pursue an ideology? No, he's not.
Yeah.
In that sense, it's not quite, fascism or something. What it is authoritarianism. He said, remember that he was caught on an open mic saying that, he would like people to react here in the United States the same way they do when the North Korean dictator Kim Jong-un walks in a room. I want everyone to stand up. He wants obedience. He wants preemptive capitulation.
Yeah.
That's what this presidency in its second term has been designed to accomplish.
Yeah.
It's funny you say that because when I looked at the images yesterday, if you've ever seen a Vladimir Putin press conference,
he comes through the door.
He comes through the door, and he's got the military guard there. And Trump did the same thing yesterday.
Yeah,
he was I'm sure, Jacob, you saw the sidelines were all military people. It was really very fascinating to watch that.
But Jacob,
that's definitely yeah.
I want to ask you about that because what you're saying and what has gone on throughout history, it's appealed to a lot of people in America is the strong man, the person who, like Trump. To me, Trump has done this expertly, whether he knows it or not. But I am the only one who can solve the problems. I am, this singular being that can do everything, and it is infallible. And that seems to appeal a lot to a lot of people who are disaffected and the like, and that's part of his election. But this has gone on throughout history, and what you're saying is that there have been people like this that people have been appealed to and really liked their style for a long time. And I think,
that's right. I mean, there's nothing unique about Donald Trump,
right?
Except, the unique part is his personal history and his branding skills.
Yeah.
And, he's an effective, we haven't had a demagogue who's been able to use social media the way Trump does. I mean, you had Hitler using the radio and using the airplane to fly around Germany, things people hadn't done before. So there's always a new technology. But the basic instinct is the same, domination.
Yeah.
So how fearful should we be, Jacob? I mean, we have 4 years. Who knows? He might try for 4 more on top of that. But, I mean, basically the courts, Supreme Court, the Congress, and now the executive branch are all controlled by one party, and they don't seem to be pushing back very much against our leader here.
The Achilles heel of Trump is that he has the ability to push through some of these policies that he's talking about, such as the tariffs on other nations, and he may crash the economy. That's what I keep wondering about. Because if you deport all these immigrants and you raise tariffs to 25% on Mexico and Canada, as he said he would do today, you are heading for another bout of inflation and the ineptitude of his administration as well. This is not someone who's appointing people who are unusually capable. Instead, they're being appointed because they're supposed to be loyal to him reflexively.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So I don't think it can end well.
Yeah.
First presidency didn't end well. This one could be worse.
It certainly seems. I mean, again, it feels like we've been under the new administration for about 4 months, and it's a matter of a week and a half.
Days,
but there have been some missteps already. I mean, what he did on the federal funding freeze, the way he did it and having to rescind it, I mean, really is at least in my opinion, I mean, it was a losing position that he took. And Jacob, a topic near and dear to, I think, your heart and my heart is what's happening in the Middle East. I mean, when Trump comes out and says, we're going to just basically throw out all of the Gazans and we're going to hope Jordan and Egypt will take them. Right. I mean, look, that's not going to happen, okay? I mean, a lot of good things may happen in the Middle East. I just don't see that displacement of a people to two countries that really don't want to take on people. I mean, are those the kind of policies that maybe average America living in Nebraska or South Dakota starts to kind of shake their head and say, what is going on here?
Well, I mean, basically Trump is riffing. He's just kind of freelancing out there. But Arnie, I'm getting the feeling that you think this isn't going to be a new golden age.
No, it's not. So let me ask you this, Jake. And I think that this is when I'm seeing, like you said, I think the real downfall of this administration will be economic. I agree with that. I think that if you do these tariffs, if you do things where you make people poorer, you take some of these programs away from people that they're really surviving off of, then, his very base and others will become poorer, will become that disaffected mob that I don't understand how the rich getting richer and the poor getting poorer helps everything to become a golden age. So I guess what I'm asking is, I think that the Achilles heel is that, and in the past, have these kinds of states been brought down because of that? Not just wars that put people out of business, but I mean, in other places, has that been a problem, uprising of their own people?
Yeah, though I don't foresee an uprising, to be honest. I just think, we will have a midterm election.
Yeah.
And, that's one of the reasons Trump's trying to move as quickly as he can now, or at least the Republican Party is, because they want to ram through everything before there is a midterm election.
Yeah.
But I don't think this course is sustainable. He's fired a lot, wrecking the government here in Washington, firing all these people in the Federal Aviation Authority, which he's done over the past week.
Yeah.
It's all going to have consequences. People are going to see it firsthand. Now, he became president claiming he was going to lower egg prices and everything was going to be hunky-dory. And when it's not, the rubber hits the road.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know what egg prices are in the district, but
they're
pretty high here in New Orleans, and I guess we could attribute it to bird flu, but we'll see. You talked about the midterms, which I think is a really interesting topic because all of the Republican members of Congress, for the most part, are afraid to speak out and go against policy right now. I'm wondering if the Dems do have a good midterm election. And assuming Trump really is gonna, that term limits are gonna kick in. Do you anticipate maybe in the years 3 and 4 that you're gonna finally start to see Republican pushback on some of the policies?
Well, we don't know. I mean, if he gets crushed in the midterms, he's going to be, he's also very thin-skinned.
Yeah.
The more immediate question, I think, is in March right now, if we go through the debt limit. That could trigger an economic depression as well. The Republican Party itself is divided right now, and you saw that with his rescinding that OMB memo on funding the government. You see, they would like to go after Medicare and Social Security and these other things, but the party is split. And it's not clear to me. He needs to raise the debt limit in March. not clear, is he ready to make concessions to the Democrats, you know?
Yeah.
Right now, the Democrats just need to be an opposition party.
Yeah.
They're not responsible for anything.
Yes. We only got a few minutes, Jacob, but I want to, before we let you go, I want to shift to foreign policy just really quickly here, because I think two of the biggest issues, on the table is what is the administration policy going to be vis-a-vis Iran, and second, something near and dear to I think both of our hearts is what's going to happen with Ukraine. Could you try to touch on both those?
Yeah. So Iran is unclear. I think Trump's instinct would be to cut a deal with the Iranians and maybe even try to establish relations. However, both Marco Rubio, Secretary of State, and his national security advisor, Mike Waltz, are hawks. So there'll be a fight in the administration over that only Trump can settle. On Ukraine, which is the single most foreign policy or most important foreign policy question of our time, brutal invasion by Vladimir Putin. It's a genocidal war. We have to support them. Trump said he could solve it in 24 hours, and he went to 100 days, I think.
Yeah.
My only hope is, that there's enough support in Congress to maintain aid, and that Trump realizes that Putin is not interested in a deal and takes that badly and ramps up the pressure on Russia. Because, look, I think in this sense we are in this sort of pre-World War II situation where you can't just let this dictator run roughshod. Because if he goes after Ukraine, he's not stopping there. He's going after the Baltic states next. He's going to try and evict the United States as if he can, just through pressure from Europe, from the rest of Europe.
Yes. Well, let's hope that whatever reasonable voices, how small, albeit small, that are still having an ear and some influence, hopefully on Ukraine, that they can convince the president that to throw Ukraine under the bus at this point would be just a terrible precedent for the world and not in America's interest. No. Kerry wanted me to ask you, Jacob, because you're an expert. He's been looking at real estate in Greenland and Panama and was wondering whether that would be a good investment at this point.
I think Greenland, with all those natural resources, might be pretty pricey at this point, but I wish him good luck.
It's a little cold for me, too.
Jacob, how can, again, I can't tell our listening audience enough, America Last. It is
America Last.
America
it's published
Last
by Norton, and it's on Amazon or at your bookstore.
You beat me to it. Go buy the book, get it. You'll love it. It's an easy read, and you will learn so much about the history of our country and our leadership. Jacob, I wish you the best. We'll get you on again in the future here. Best wishes to you. It was really an honor to meet you, and look forward to seeing you again next time that I'm in D.C.
Thanks, Arnie. And who's going to win the Super Bowl?
Well, here in New Orleans, we don't have that much interest, but I think Kerry and I are at least pulling for the Eagles.
Philly.
Same here.
Sorry
Talk
about
to you
your
soon.
Commanders, but they're
Yeah.
young and they got a great quarterback.
Absolutely.
Jacob, thank you. Appreciate it. And
Thank
to
you.
everybody, thank you for a great week. We've had some great guests. It's been a lot of fun.
It's been a great week.
Lots of things happening. Be a fun weekend. Mardi Gras stuff is happening all over the community, and
that's right.
People getting ready for Super Bowl. So everybody be safe and enjoy their time. And Kerry and I will be back with you next Tuesday night at 6:00.
See you next week.
See you, everybody.
That's right. It's party time each and every Sunday night at 7 p.m. on WBOK. It's the Throwback Throwdown with DJ Wick as he brings you the best in old school from the 70s, 80s, 90s, and the early 2Ks. Plus, the party goes to another level at 9 p.m. with the Throwback Throwdown Party Mix to round out the night. It's the Throwback Throwdown Sunday nights at 7 p.m. on WBOK 1230 a.m. and on the World Wide Web at WBOK1230.com.
Saints of God, it's time for us to tell you the truth. It's time for you to start your 21-day challenge. Don't take another day. Do it right now. Call 504-701-4711. That's the Whole Water Stove, Pastor David Impartian Sr., the host of Change Your Water, Change Your Mind. This is the water that's designed to change your body, the way you think, the way you act, and the way you look. Why don't you start your 21-day challenge today? For $35, you can start it right now. Call me so we can set up your appointment. 504-701-4711. That's 504-701-4711. Change your water, change your mind.
WBOK 1230 AM. Listen now on WBOK1230.com.
From the campus of Xavier University. WBOK 1230 AM. Go. An Equity Media Station.
I'm Amber Payton with 4 Things You Should Know with BIN News. President Trump is confirming no survivors in last night's D.C. plane crash, which likely killed 67 people. He called it a national tragedy and vowed to prevent future incidents. The crash occurred over the Potomac around 9